Hey guys, welcome to another Battle for Zendikar limited review video here on the Need to Hone Magic channel. Over the last few days I've done videos talking about the best commons and uncommons in each color, and these videos are good for showing you kind of what colors are going to be the strongest, what the top picks are going to be at each color. But this video covers all the colors, and it's about the top 10 rares and mythics that you want to be opening in pack 1 of a Battle for Zendikar 3-pack draft. They're the cards that when you see them, it's pretty much a slam first pick, and you can try to force your deck to go that route. I mean, I wouldn't say force. If the color ends up not being open, sometimes you do end up abandoning it. But they're the cards that, you're probably never going to see unless you're first picking them in the first pack. Or if, somehow your color is incredibly open. I do want to say first that compared to Magic Origins, it seems to me that Battle for Zendikar is going to be a much more bomb-based strategy where rares are incredibly powerful, like sort of similar to how they were in Fate Reforged, maybe not quite that strong, but somewhere between Magic Origins and Fate Reforged. It was really hard to pick 10 rares and mythics that would be that I think are the most powerful in the limited format. I do have a couple honorable mentions, but there's tons of other cards that are incredibly powerful in this format that haven't made the list. But these are the two that I think deserve to be mentioned the most, and they are Kiora, Master of the Depths, and Emiria Shepherd. Kiora probably would have made it if she were a monocolored commander. The fact that she's two colors kind of makes her a little less good than she could be otherwise, because if you pick her up in your first pick, for example, you're pretty much locked into that color pair. And the blue-green color pair looks like it's going to be an interesting one, and I think Kiora is going to be pretty good. She can protect herself in a way, the way most Planeswalkers can. She can untap a creature, most good Planeswalkers can, I should say. She can untap a creature and a land for her +1 ability, meaning you can untap, be willing to swing with a creature and then untap the creature in your second main phase with Kiora. She can also draw you 2 cards at a time with her -2 ability, 1 land and 1 creature, or 2 lands or 2 creatures. You can read the ability there. And her emblem, of course, is completely ridiculous. If you get to do her emblem, there's pretty much no way you should lose a game of Limited and Magic or Battle for Zendikar, excuse me. You get 3 8/8 blue octopus creatures, which is already like, okay, well, that's pretty great. But on top of that, you get an emblem that says anytime any creature enters the battlefield under your control, you get to fight a creature. So her ability effectively kills 3 of your opponent's creatures and gives you 3 8/8 blue octopus creature tokens. Even if your opponent manages to deal with all of these, every creature you play can be a removal spell because it has fight attached to it. So she gets pretty ridiculous. Her -2 is probably what people are going to do the most frequently, unless they're really trying to go for her -8. Because her -2, drawing you 2 cards at a time, is obviously very good. And that's really the reason she gets mentioned on here, is because of her -2. Even if you just get to do that twice, you paid 4 mana to draw 4 cards. That's a pretty ridiculous rate, and she's pretty amazing. And she can protect herself if she needs to, and help you ramp if you need to as well with her +1. The other card is Emiria Shepherd. It's one of the cards from a cycle of cards in the format that have landfall, and then they have like 1 ability with landfall if it's any land, and then if the land is of the color of the card, for example, in this case, plains, you get an extra effect. And Emiria Shepherd's incredibly powerful. This is going to be a pretty slow format, so a 7-drop here this will almost always see play if you see it and you're in a white deck. It's a 7-mana 4/4 flying, not the greatest rate, but the landfall ability is pretty ridiculous. And if you want to wait for her to impact the board immediately, you could even wait till you have the 8th land in your hand and it's a plains, play the Shepherd and then play your plains. That way, if your opponent has removal, you don't just get 1 for 1. You get some value out of the Shepherd. But you don't have to wait like that. Her ability, as you can see here, is that you get to return a non-land permanent card from your graveyard to your hand if you play any land. And if it's a plains, you get to return it to the battlefield, which is just crazy. By turn 7 or 8 or 9, when you're playing this, you're going to have permanents in your graveyard that getting back are going to be incredibly important. More creatures, get you ahead on the board, and plus you just played a 4/4 flyer for 7, so that's not nothing. So she's very good. She is incredibly powerful, obviously, just as Kiora is, but I think the 10 cards I put on this list are actually more powerful. And there is, I think, 1 card from the same cycle on my list, but I think Emiria Shepherd's one of the stronger in that cycle, just because you can get so much value out of returning cards from your graveyard just directly to the battlefield with her. You do need to be a mostly white deck to really get the most value out of her, but even just getting cards back from your graveyard to your hand every time you play a Plains is ridiculous. So anyway, those are the 2 cards I wanted to mention that didn't quite make the list for me, but that are 2 very powerful cards, and I could see first picking a lot of the time anyway, even with Kiora's sort of downside of locking you into a 2-color combination. Anyway, so on to the top 10 list. At number 10, I have Drana, Liberator of Malik here. Probably going to be the best 3-drop in the format. I mean, it's a Mythic, so you're not going to see it very often. First of all, it's an ally, so it can trigger all of the rally abilities, which are relevant in this format. And she's a 3-mana 2/3 with flying and first strike. You know, I'm already sold pretty much. But then on top of that, Drana, Liberator of Malik here, when it deals combat damage to a player, puts a +1/+1 counter on every attacking creature you control. Now, the important thing to remember here is that because she has first strike, she'll actually do damage to your opponent and give your whole team +1/+1 counters before they do damage to your opponent, unless they have first strike or double strike. And even with double strike, the second hit will still have the +1/+1 counter. So she pumps your whole team immediately. She doesn't, you know, your guys don't all hit your opponent and then get +1/+1 counters. They get them immediately, and they get them every time she attacks. So if your opponent doesn't deal with her quickly, and even if they deal with her after she sings once, you've gotten a lot of value out of pumping your whole team. And she's going to be able to get in for the damage pretty easily if you can always, you know, if you can play her pretty consistently on turn 3 or 4, because there aren't many things that can block her in the air that won't just die to her. You know, be chump blocking her. So she's very powerful. You know, she's not like a huge bomb like some of the cards are, but she's the kind of card that if your opponent drops it on turn 3 and you don't have any removal in your hand, you're probably toast. She also puts +1/+1 counters on herself, so that's a important thing to remember as well. That her damage obviously won't be impacted by it immediately, but everyone else's will. So even if she's attacking alone, though, she basically, you know, gets renown every time she hits something. So it's a pretty powerful effect. And on top of that, they made her an ally, so she also has effects and rally in the decks that have creatures with rally. All right, so number 9 on my list is Guardian of Tazim. It's what I was mentioning. It's from the same cycle as the 7-mana 4/4 Flying Angel that returns things from your graveyard if you play Plains, returns them to your battlefield, and if you didn't play a Plains, if you played any other land, returns it to your hand. And Guardian of Tazim is already a very efficiently costed creature. That's one thing that it edges out the white card from this cycle, and it's a 5-mana for a 4/5 flyer. You're going to play that in basically any format ever. You know, it's better than an air elemental. An air elemental is always played, you know. But it has even more text, of course. It has a landfall ability. And it's whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you can tap a creature, target creature an opponent controls. Now, if that land's an island, you get to Crippling Chill. You know, lock down that creature for a turn. Doesn't untap during its controller's untap step. Now, the difference between Guardian of Tazim and the white card from the same cycle is also that Guardian of Tazim's effect, if you don't play an island, isn't nearly as strong as the white cards is if you play a Plains. Don't play a Plains. But tapping an opponent's creature down could allow you to swing through for lethal, you know, your guys on the ground, or tap a flyer out of the way just so the Guardian can swing. So it's usually going to be hitting for 4 damage, you know, as long as you're activating landfall. And then if you have an island, it's going to be locking creatures down, and that's just brutal. You know, being able to play like an Evolving Wilds and get an island, for example, is a pretty ugly turn for your opponent. I have it ranked higher than the white one just because it's a much more efficiently costed creature. It's also harder to kill with 5 toughness, and its effect is, you know, almost removal, and it can really give you a tempo swing. And it's another card, you know, all these cards are really cards that if your opponent plays them and you can't do anything about it, you're going to lose in short order. So that's what Guardian of Tazim will do to you as well, and hopefully it'll do it in your favor more often than not. Number 8, I have From Beyond. It's one of the Devoid cards. 3 and a green enchantment. It's a, you know, sort of a spin-off of Awakening Zone, which was in the original Rise of the Eldrazi. Instead of making 0/1 tokens, though, this makes 1/1 colorless Eldrazi creature tokens that can sacrifice that one to your mana pool. So it's an enchantment that gives you a 1/1 creature every upkeep, and on top of that, it can help you ramp. So it's an incredibly powerful effect. I think this is going to be a very first pickable card. It does sort of lock you into, to some degree at least, a more rampy kind of deck, but you can also decide to go sort of wide on your opponent and build like a green-white allies deck that can pump your whole team every time you play an ally and things like that. On top of that, though, it can also search your library for an Eldrazi card and put it in your hand. So once your Eldrazi Scions have accumulated enough, and you can play your Ulamog. You can search for Ulamog and just drop him. So From Beyond is, it's another card that's not going to immediately impact the board in the way some of the other cards in this list will. But things will quickly roll out of control for your opponent, either because you're able to make these 1/1 creatures every turn, or because it enables you to ramp into bigger spells more quickly than your opponent can do it. So From Beyond, I think it's going to be a very good card, first pickable most of the time. Next up, we actually have a gold card, which gold cards don't usually make these lists for me. As I talked about Kiora, it's harder for me to include gold cards because you sort of have to commit to 2 colors. But I think Sire of Stagnation is good enough that I would be willing to try it out and try to make blue-black work. Because, first of all, it's a 6 mana 5/7, a good rate. And after that, it's a colorless creature, so it has all the synergies with the blue-black devoid decks that have processors and what are the other ones called? The ones with ingest. The creatures with ingest and the creatures who process the exiled cards. The blue-black archetype, that's pretty much what it's going to be. And Sire of Stagnation fits into that very well. 6 mana 5/7, good deal. And on top of that, every time your opponent, it's like reverse landfall. Every time your opponent has a land enter the battlefield, they have to exile the top 2 cards of his or her library, and you draw 2 cards. So it exiles 2 cards that will then feed your Eldrazi processors, and it draws you cards. That's the more important part of the card, really, is that it draws you 2 cards. It's a very good name for the card because your opponent is going to be put in a really strange situation where if you play this on turn 6, they're going to not be sure they want to play anything to advance the board. Any lands anyway to advance their board because the card advantage you're going to generate is going to be so great. So even if your opponent doesn't play lands, they're having to play around Sire of Stagnation, try to find removal for it before its effect happens. Sire of Stagnation is still going to be very powerful because it makes your opponent play differently. And to deal with a 5/7, they're going to have to play another land more than likely. This is going to be a format that's slow, where people want 7 or 8 or 9 lands in play. So as soon as your opponent just plays 1 land, you get value out of Sire of Stagnation, and it's replaced itself plus another card, and it'll feed your processors. So I think it's going to be a very good card. I may be a little high on it just because I think it's a really cool card. I'm really hoping to draft it myself a few times because it's a really cool card. But I like Sire of Stagnation a lot. I think it's the 7th best mythic or rare to open in pack 1 and take in with pick 1 in triple Battle for Zendikar format. At number 6, we're back to a mono green card, and we have Green Warden of Murasa. Green Warden of Murasa is kind of like a double Eternal Witness. You pay double what you would pay for Eternal Witness, and it does the Eternal Witness effect twice. If you don't know Eternal Witness, it returns a card from your graveyard to your hand, and that's any card. So this thing generates ridiculous value. If you saw how good Possessed Skob was in Magic Origins, Green Warden of Murasa is like 2 or 3 times better. Has a bigger body, it's monocolored, so it's easier to play, and it can return any card. Possessed Skob couldn't return any card. It can return almost any card, though, to be fair. But Green Warden Murasa can get back lands if you need them to trigger landfall with like Evolving Wilds or something. And it does it twice. So it does it when it enters the battlefield, and it does it when it dies. And you get to return 2 cards from your graveyard to your hand. It does get exiled, so you can't do any crazy reanimation things with it and get all kinds of value. But it has a crazy enter the battlefield and a crazy dies ability. There's basically no way you won't get value out of this. It's an easy, it's not a 2 or 3 for 1 in the sense that it'll kill other things, although it can do that too. If you block your opponent's creature, kill it, and get a card back from your graveyard, you're in pretty great shape, especially because you got another card back when the Green Warden came into play. So it's a very good card, very first pickable. I would run it every single time I saw it, and I was, in green. I would always take it pack 1, pick 1 if I saw it. And if I see it later in the draft and I'm in green, or even, just a little bit in green, I would want to push myself towards going green to make this card work for me because it's such an engine. At number 5, I have Gideon, Ally of Zendikar. Planeswalkers are always strong. We already saw one on an honorable mention. Gideon is no exception. His +1 ability turns him into a 5/5 human soldier ally creature token. He's an ally, which is cool, but his effect won't trigger rally because it's when another ally comes into play. So the fact that he's an ally is kind of irrelevant. It's just flavor, really. But he becomes, he's a 4-mana 5/5, basically, and he can swing at your opponent. On top of that, he can also protect himself. he can put Knight ally creature tokens into play, and those will trigger Rally. So that's one thing that's important to remember, is that Gideon can just be a Rally engine. Rally is going to be a strong effect. White has the most allies already, and then they have Gideon as a mythic that you'll see every now and again. And if your opponent or you has an ally deck and you're able to keep churning out these 2/2 white Knight ally creature tokens every turn and trigger 1 or 2 rally abilities, or in Dream World 3 or 4 rally abilities, your opponent's going to be done pretty quickly, because not only are you getting a 2/2 white Knight ally, you're giving all your guys lifelink, or you're giving all your guys +2/+2, and so forth. So that's what, it's kind of something that's not as intuitive about him, that he can be a rally engine, but that's something that he can do. And on top of that, he's also, in certain situations, you may just want to play him and get the Anthem effect. His ultimate isn't the most ultimate of ultimates, but he can do it right away, which is pretty rare. And he gives your whole team an emblem. He gives you an emblem with +1/+. All your creatures get +1/+1. So basically, you have an undestroyable Sarah's Anthem in play that gives your whole team +1/+1. And so that's also can be a powerful effect. I think more often than not, he'll be sliding into ally decks and just triggering rally abilities every turn while you put more allies into play, and then on occasion swinging at your opponent as a 5/5 creature himself. So Gideon, ally of Zendikar, very good, very first pickable. If you ever see someone pass this and pick one, I don't know what they were thinking. Probably because he's also probably going to be worth something. Probably going to end up being relatively playable and constructed, I would guess, as well. At number 4, we have another white card, so back-to-back white cards. I'm always pretty high on mass removal. And Planar Outburst is basically the only mass removal spell in the format. For 5 mana, it destroys all non-land creatures. And then it has Awaken, where if you cast it for 8, it destroys all non-land creatures, and it gives you a 4/4 creature with haste. It turns one of your lands into a 4/4 creature. So in the late game, it can get even stronger because you get a creature and you nuke all your opponents. There is usually I would have like a mass removal spell at number 1. I had Languish and Tragic Arrogance is like number 1 and 2 on my Magic Origins list. But the reason I have this at number 4 is because it's actually relevant that it doesn't destroy non-land creatures. There's actually a man land in the set, for one thing. Lots of cards with Awaken that are a lot of which are playable. So there are going to be times where not being able to destroy your opponent's non-land creatures is going to be a little bit disappointing. Your opponent's going to have 1 or 2 creatures still in play when you cast this. But it can also be at its best in a deck that has lots of Awaken cards, because your whole team survives and you blow up most of your opponent's creatures. It's still very good. People are going to be first picking it. But it doesn't have the upside that some have, because the fact that it can't destroy land creatures is actually relevant. All right, so number 3, I have Ulamog, the Ceaseless Hungerer. Some of you might have thought I would put this at number 1. The only reason I don't have him, in a vacuum, he's definitely the most powerful card in the entire format. But he does cost 10, and that is relevant, even in a format with all this ramp. He's 10 mana for a 10/10 Indestructible, who exiles 2 permanents when he comes into play. Okay, so he's going to generate value no matter what, even if your opponent manages to exile Ulamog. And there are exile effects in this format, so his indestructibility isn't as good as it might have been in past sets, because there are a number of exile effects in this format that can remove Ulamog, the Ceaseless Hungerer, from play at uncommon and common even. And on top of that, like if it wasn't enough, he shaves half of your opponent's library and off every time he swings. So even if you don't hit your opponent in limited, if he swings twice, your opponent's dead, because you can play with more than 40 cards, but people don't usually. Maybe if you know your opponent has Ulamog, you side in some more cards, but I wouldn't advise it too much. You just have to hope your opponent doesn't get to 10 mana. But he's at 3, even though, as I said, he's definitely in a vacuum the most powerful card in the format, because he has to be in a ramp strategy. We saw From Beyond earlier. If you first pick Ulamog, second pick From Beyond, you're going to be living the dream basically. And there's also, the black-green deck is sort of going to be a ramp deck that concentrates on Eldrazi Scion. There's also going to be, any deck with green in it can be a ramp deck, multiple color ramp deck in this format. And Ulamog won't be as hard to cast as 10 drops have been in other formats. And, 10 might seem like a lot if you're fresh off playing Magic Origins, but it's going to be pretty castable in this format, and you're definitely going to try to build around him if you open him. There will be instances where you just don't pick up enough ramp because that deck's not open, and you're going to end up not being able to play Ulamog sometimes, and that's why he's at number 3, even though he's definitely the most powerful card in the entire format in a vacuum. Number 2, we have sort of at the other end of the spectrum, Dragon Master Outcast, a 1-drop, who's a 1/1, and he's a reprint, and he was incredibly good last time he was around, which was also in the last Zendikar block. And it's 1 mana for a 1/1, and then at the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 6 or more lands, you put a 5/5 red dragon creature token with flying onto the battlefield, which, okay, that's pretty amazing. Dragon Master Outcast, you probably aren't usually going to want to play in turn 1, even though he's a 1-drop, and that is relevant. You're usually going to want to hold on to him until your opponent's sort of spent removal on, trying to put you behind on board, and then you can drop this guy when your opponent has 1 or 2 cards in their hand, hopefully that aren't removal. And as long as you get 1 trigger out of this, your opponent's going to have a hard time coming back. If you get 2 or more triggers, they're probably never coming back because it's just such a powerful effect. And the reason it's number 2 is because it's just so easy to cast. It's monocolored. If you have 6 lands in play, it's ridiculous. If you look at it as a 6 mana 1/1 that puts a 5/5 red dragon creature token with flying onto the battlefield every upkeep, you would play that, and that's in a way what it is, because like I said, usually you don't want to play this in turn 1 because it is very easy to remove, but it's just such a powerful effect that I think it warrants being at number 2 on this list. Now, the best rare or mythic in this format is, I think, Ciaseless Reignited, another Planeswalker. He's 5 mana, and he has 5 loyalty, which is relatively high, and his +1 ability is incredibly good. Planeswalkers that can draw you cards are good. We saw that with Kiora. But Planeswalkers that can draw you cards and destroy creatures are even better. And Ciaseless can also be a 5 mana removal spell. And he can use it twice. If you just draw a card and you lose 1 life, the next 2 turns you can destroy 2 creatures. His emblem's good. It's actually, I would say, probably not as game-breaking as Kiora's, but it is very good. It's game-breaking, but I think most of the time you're going to end up wanting to destroy creatures with him before you get to the -8. But for what it's worth, his emblem makes it so whenever any player draws a card, your opponent loses 2 life. So, every time it's their turn, they lose 2 life. Every time it's your turn, they lose 2 life. So they lose a lot of life. Plus, with Ciaseless, you can make them lose 4 life every turn, every time it's your turn, with the draw card effect. So, he's incredibly powerful between his removal and his card draw, and that's what I think makes him good. Planeswalkers, are always strong in whatever format they're printed in. And, there are 2 Planeswalkers on this list and 1 on the honorable mentions, so this format isn't going to be any different, I don't think, in terms of the strength of the Planeswalkers. Anyway, that's my top 10 list for the top 10 rares and mythics in Battle for Zendikar, 3 packs of Battle for Zendikar draft. Let me know what you think. Let me know if you think I left things out. As I said, I think there are a lot of cards that could compete to be on this list, and once the format starts, it'll be really clear which ones I whiffed on. I wouldn't be surprised if I did. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment. And if you haven't entered into my Battle for Zendikar draft giveaway, an annotation should appear here to take you to how you can enter that. Thanks for watching.